Hey folks, just wanted to give a shout out to Dominic Eagle, the author of tonight's story. Be sure to go check out his channel, Black Volumes, for more awesome stories. A link will be in the description below. We discovered a rainforest on an unexplored mountain, and something discovered us. The second worst mistake was arriving. The worst mistake was leaving. There's a certain arrogance to human exploration, driving the flak into the dirt first, as if that means a damn thing. Of course, I'm not entirely cynical. Charting the world is about more than greed and glory. It's about overcoming that ancient fear of the unknown, mapping every plot of land so there are no more hidden crevices to keep us up at night. Nonetheless, our endeavors are selfish, and we have for many centuries blindly considered ourselves superior. When discovering new land, we've never considered a haunting possibility that something other than man may have already staked the claim. Temper your expectations, Dr. Crenshaw, our expedition leader, warned loudly. As we scaled the cliff face of a 1,000-meter-tall mountain, I grunted whilst finding handholds and footholds in unreliable nooks. We were ascending no ordinary mountain. The rock-formed skyscraper jutted from the dirt like a square, or perhaps a squircle, poking out of a sorting cube's hole. It was a flat-topped mount rising almost unnaturally out of the ground-level forest, a misshapen mountain sprouting bushy trees, like hairs from its level head. That old-growth rainforest we hoped would be untouched. We wanted to discover it before anyone else. It was an inselberg, meaning island mountain. Such natural formations which tower above flat land are difficult to climb on account of their near vertical sides. That was why we doubted any early humans would have managed to reach the top of the berg. We were ecstatic to be the first explorers to tread on that sky-high soil. An undiscovered piece of land is a rarity in the 21st century. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the mountaintop. Crenshaw was the first to disappear over the sharp edge. He crawled onto the grass, unclipped his carabiner, and gasped loudly, prompting Howard Williams, Rachel Garcia, and me to speed up a little, as we were eager to experience that momentous event for ourselves. I was the second to cross the threshold and see the rainforest in reality rather than a photograph. I pushed up from the grass with my palms, and my jaw fell as I stood, as I witnessed the splendor of the wooded ocean ahead. A canopy of leaves nearly entirely blocking out all sunlight, creating a sense of calm in the forest, a sense of peace that we were about to disturb. This was a team of biologists and researchers who had spent years following in the footsteps of others. We did not stop to think. We were all enchanted by the possibility of doing something original, the possibility of making history. "What do you think, Steph?" Howard asked, collecting our climbing equipment. "It's pretty," I said, brushing mud and debris off my clothes. He rolled his eyes. "I was hoping for something a little more, scientific." "And I was hoping for more than 30 seconds to conduct my research, Howard," I teased. He chuckled and replied, "That's fair." "I'm eager to see this cave," Rachel said. Dr. Crenshaw pointed ahead. "Well, if we push ahead, we'll be in and out long before nightfall." "You seem confident," Howard said. "Do you need a moment to get your bearings?" "Not at all, Williams. I've been studying the aerial mappings religiously for the past month," Dr. Crenshaw said. "To the detriment of my health, I must admit." "Yes, it was a little disconcerting to have a yawning man climbing directly above me," I pointed out. "But after watching you work for so many weeks, I don't doubt that you would be able to sleepwalk your way to this cave entrance." Our leader laughed, letting a glimpse of emotion loose. "I won't argue with that, Smithson. Come on, let's get going." Crenshaw was such a tightly wound man. I was relieved to see him letting his muscles loosen, letting himself enjoy something. He rarely looked joyous. His hunger to climb this inselberg in Mozambique was driven by necessity, not desire. It was an itch he simply had to scratch, no matter how apprehensive he felt. He wasn't a cold man. In fact, I'd always viewed him a little as a father figure, stoic and silent, but layered. I wanted to help our leader, wanted to ease some of his anxiety about the excursion. That was why I rushed through the tall, mopane trees of the forest, which formed a sun-obstructing canopy overhead. Rushed to catch up to Crenshaw. The man was twice my age, but barely broke a sweat. His pace was hard to match, so I settled for tagging along just behind him. "This is a historical moment," I breathlessly said. Crenshaw grunted. If? I repeated between heavy pants. "If we haven't been beaten," he finished. I shook my head. "We haven't been beaten. I'm sure of it. We were the first to locate this forest with the aerial." "I'm not talking about recorded history," Dr. Crenshaw interrupted. "At some point long ago, man may well have walked here." "How?" I asked. "The sides are so steep, so difficult to climb even with modern gear." "Sometimes," the man began, slowing his stride, "things are difficult to see, Smithson." And then he stopped, causing me to almost bump into his back. "Careful, Steph," Rachel said, almost colliding with me. "Was the hold up slowpoke?" "We found it," Dr. Crenshaw whispered. The leader stepped aside, allowing the rest of the team to see what he had found. There was a hole in the dirt, the entrance to the cave, to a pocket within the mountain. "I'll unload the gear," Howard said, starting to unzip his rucksack. "No need," Crenshaw replied, pointing his torch into the chasm. "Look." The four of us crept towards the edge of the cave entrance below our feet, and we followed the bright beam. It illuminated a walkway protruding from the cave's inner entrance, a slope of rock hugging the wall and spiraling downwards. Not a single member of the team spoke for the next 30 seconds. Our gazes traced every surface revealed by the beam. I did not know for certain, but I presumed the sloping walkway continued right to the bottom, as the torch did not illuminate the cave's floor 100 feet below. Eventually, we all accepted the hole's inescapable purpose. "A stairwell," Rachel whispered. Crenshaw nodded. "Yes, Garcia, a stairwell." "So, we're not first," Howard sighed. "All of that effort to find a long-lost remnant of our ancestors," Dr. Crenshaw finished, taking a tentative step onto the stone slide. "That doesn't seem like a good idea," I said. "We have no idea how old it might be." "It's more than a primitive staircase," the leader announced, bouncing his boot soles on the sturdy slope. "It feels sturdy. Just imagine the advanced craftsmanship necessary to construct something like this, Smithson. Those ancient hands could have merely carved a tunnel into the cave's wall, but the attached stones joined them together to form an intricate ramp. Imagine what marvels might lie below." Howard and Rachel followed their leader into the entrance, but I frowned and firmly stood my ground. It doesn't feel right. What kind of prehistoric civilization would have been able to achieve this? None of my team members answered, and I realized, as they kept walking, that I would either have to follow or be left alone. Left in a forest which didn't fill me with as much wonder as I'd expected. I chose to follow. I hurried to catch up to my colleagues, hardly noticing that they had stopped walking. Had stopped to stare in awe at the wall. "Careful," I laughed, echoing Rachel's earlier caution as I nearly bumped into her. "There's no handrail up here." She pointed at the wall. "Look at this, Steph." I followed the light of Crenshaw's torch to several lines of markings on the cave wall. The four of us moved closer to the symbols with incremental waddles, as there was little room on the 3 feet wide slope. But moving nearer did nothing to answer burning questions. The marks, falling somewhere between drawings and hieroglyphs, became less discernible the closer I looked. It was as if the shapes were shifting, endlessly restructuring. I told myself, of course, that is just a trick of the light. I felt silly, as I'd explored countless cave systems across the planet, and had never been afraid of the dark before, never been afraid of the unexplained. But there was a secret in that place I knew we weren't meant to learn. Something in my mind, or perhaps my very body, rejected the cave, reacted violently, screeching at me to drag the four of us out of there. Some small part of me, however, wouldn't cooperate. "You're the expert," Howard said to Crenshaw. "What is this?" "It's beautiful," the leader answered in a faint whisper. There was a detached expression on his face, an absent, unwilling nature to the way in which he raised a shaky hand towards the wall. Crenshaw was always detached, of course, but never like this. He was always lost in thought, but there no longer seemed to be anything behind the man's teary eyes. "Get a hold of yourself," I berated myself. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for your career. Do not fumble it." "We should record this," Rachel timidly suggested as our leader brushed his fingertips against the etchings. "Dr. Crenshaw, I don't think we should do that. We wouldn't want to damage it." "Damage it?" Howard asked before laughing. "It's a stone etching that's lasted for millennia. It'll survive the human touch." He didn't feel it, but Rachel did. I did. "Dr. Crenshaw?" I started. Then came a sharp cry of pain from our fearless leader's mouth, and the rest of us jolted in shock. We steadied ourselves quickly, thankfully, managing not to plummet over the side of the slope, and Crenshaw's hand retracted, whipped backwards with what sounded like the crack of bones. Except the awful noise came from the wall itself. "Crenshaw?" Howard cried. "Are you okay?" "Yes," the man murmured. He lifted his index finger into the light of his torch, revealing a thin trickle of red spilling down the back of his hand. "How did you do that?" Howard asked. "Did you cut it on something?" I started to take off my rucksack. "I've got the first aid kit." Dr. Crenshaw shook his head and shone the torch beam onto the wall again. "That won't be necessary." Only I seemed to see it as the man quickly drew his torch away. But my photographic memory always serves me well. There had undoubtedly been a difference in the drawing. One of the shapes had vanished. The squiggles or glyphs meant nothing to me, but I could see each of them clearly in my mind. There had been, amongst the rows of etchings, a trapezium bearing two small dots within. It was missing from the end of the final line, from the spot on the wall that I was certain Crenshaw had touched with his outstretched forefinger. But I have no idea why I didn't tell the others that. No idea why I let them continue to follow the slope down into the cave. No idea, most importantly, why I followed. Things were off-center in that place. We were off-center. My eyes scanned the walls erratically as we descended deeper and deeper. The lack of any further etchings only made me fear that they had been there, but vanished. Then my skin started to itch, and it was only adrenaline that stopped me from scratching. Half an hour later, we reached it. The end of the stairwell, the floor of the cave. And once he'd stepped off the stone slope, Dr. Crenshaw turned to cast his light onto the team. Everybody was uncharacteristically quiet, and I didn't like it. I didn't like that as we followed the sloping staircase, I'd noticed Howard and Rachel scratching at their skin too. Red, nail-carved streaks marked their napes. "I need to stop," Rachel mumbled, swaying on her feet. In response to her request, strangely, Dr. Crenshaw faced away from us. He swung his torch to face the large black tunnel ahead, the true cave. By my estimations, this tunnel can only be at most 30 acres long, the leader grumbled. At a brisk pace, we could reach the end in half an hour. We must soldier onwards, Garcia. I crossed the cave's floor over to Rachel, her shuddering form barely visible with Crenshaw's torch facing the other way. The man was just standing still, staring into the dark mouth of the cave. Its real mouth, not the stairwell we'd followed. By the time I reached my colleague, she had turned pale. Even in the scarce light, that much was clear. Her rows of teeth were knocking against one another, and when I placed the back of my hand against her brow, her skin iced mine, left me with the hot sting of touching something below freezing. Of course, that seemed impossible given the cave's stifling temperature. I was sweating. I didn't understand how Rachel could be cold. "Dr. Crenshaw?" I barked as our leader eyeballed the black abyss ahead. "We need to get Rachel out of here now. She requires medical attention." "Aren't you a woman of medicine?" Crenshaw muttered quietly. I clenched my fists. "I'm a biologist, Dr. Crenshaw. You know that, but I don't know what's happening to her." Rachel was starting to squat and shrink into herself, so I guided her down to the ground. "Cold," she whimpered as I started to take off my rucksack. Inside, I found my spare coat and a jumper. Then I knelt down and proceeded to wrap my colleague in both. Howard meanwhile strolled towards Crenshaw with a huff and snatched the torch out of his hand. The leader did not protest. He continued to stare directly ahead whilst Howard walked over to us. Then the man handed the torch to me. "Could have done with an extra light whilst we were walking down the death slope," I said. "I wanted both of my hands free," Howard said before offering a weak smile. "Not my fault, you always forget the most basic things." I sighed, then said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to snap. This is just—" "I know," Howard interrupted, kneeling beside me to inspect our frozen colleague. "What's happening, Rachel? Talk to us." "My stomach," she whispered, clutching her abdomen with unsteady fingers. "It's burning." "Burning?" I asked, frowning. "You're cold to the touch." "I feel—" Rachel began, trailing off. Howard reached towards her stomach, then stopped. "We're going to need to take a look. Is that okay?" Rachel nodded. So our fellow researcher proceeded to peel back the bottom of her shirt. But his hand near immediately let it drop, and I tensed in disbelief. I had expected swollen skin, maybe a bruise, a cut, or something that would explain what was happening to Rachel. Something within the realm of science. What I had not expected was to see Rachel's ribcage, to see a hole in her flesh. Howard and I finally let loose a joint screech as we saw the hole in our friend's stomach start to enlarge. Skin around the opening's edge was vanishing into thin air, as if it were being consumed by invisible teeth. The ribcage itself bore growing gaps from the invisible nightmare gnawing away at Rachel from the inside. And behind that disappearing skeleton, there were no innards, not even desecrated innards. In the emptiest of Rachel's skin outfit, there were crystals, bulky blue crystals stained with a smattering of reddish brown. Howard threw up so instantaneously that he didn't manage to turn away, and a thick stream of vomit filled our friend's body. This revolting sight, of course, sparked a round of projectile expulsion from my own crying lips. Howard and I had finished. I moved the torch beam up her body so we wouldn't have to look at the awful widening opening any longer. Rachel's face, completely devoid of color, looked back at me. Her eyes were harrowing, full of pain, but not quite pleading for an end, as she seemed unaware of what was happening to her. Thankfully, she was too weak to look down. There came the sound of Crenshaw's footsteps disappearing into the black tunnel. He was exploring without any light at hand, seemingly tiring of waiting, and I looked up for a moment, stared into the blackness, eyes tracking the sound of his fading footsteps. Now, with no more adrenaline coursing through my veins, I am aware that I felt something. Something at the very far end of the tunnel. Something large, still, and malevolent. Something watching. Something in spite of its great size, naked to the human eye. "What's wrong?" Rachel whined, her skin's shade transforming from white to blue. "Nothing," I lied quietly. "How the fuck are you still alive?" Howard yelled, sending himself into a splutter of coughs. "Stop it, Howard," I begged before turning back to her. "You're okay, Rachel. Everything's going to be okay." "There are so many of them," she whispered, eyes beginning to roll into the back of her head. I shivered. "So many of what?" My colleague smiled as a trickle of watery liquid squeezed out of her tightly closed mouth. Not blood, as she seemed to have nothing left inside. It wasn't really a smile, of course. The muscles moved her lips into the right position, but it was muscle memory. She wasn't happy in that moment. She wasn't even Rachel anymore. Whatever grinned at us, it lifted a finger and tapped the blue lifeless temple of my colleague. "They're up there," she giggled, tapping repeatedly. "Upstairs, chattering to each other. I hear them, even now. They're still so..." And then Rachel, or whatever remained of her, extinguished. I wailed in horror and sorrow, though the knot in my chest had admittedly loosened. To see Rachel's torment end was a blessing. "Famished," Dr. Crenshaw said, completing the lifeless woman's unfinished sentence. Without a moment's hesitation, I shot the torch upwards and looked away from Rachel's corpse. The expedition leader had not vanished into the blackness of the cave, or if he had, he'd somehow silently returned to his original standing position at its mouth. His back once more was turned to us, and he eyeballed the empty tunnel ahead. Dr. Crenshaw was not the same person as he had been, however, which drew more horrified yelps from Howard and me. The back of our leader's head was missing. His skin bore an open wound, which seemed to be growing wider and wider as something unseen munched away. "They're up there," Rachel had said. Howard and I no longer wanted answers. We rose to our feet and crept backwards, reversing towards the slope. "We're going to get help," Howard feebly promised as we both started to turn, preparing to hastily ascend to safety. I kept my torch beam on the floor below, illuminating Dr. Crenshaw, who still refused to turn and face us. But as Howard and I followed the spiraling staircase upwards, the side of our leader's body came into view. The side of his face. Once we were near directly above the frozen, mutilated man, Howard clutched tightly to my shaking body and I leaned over the edge of the slope, casting the torch downwards. "Please stay here," I weakly requested, eyeballing the statue beneath our feet, terrifyingly. I didn't feel fear for Dr. Crenshaw, but for my fleeing colleague and me, a feeling justified by the project leader's head snapping backwards. I nearly slipped over the edge, saved only by Howard's firm grip as Crenshaw's face cranked upwards. Only there was no face left at all. "They are too small to be seen," the man whispered without a mouth, without vocal cords. "We enter their home, and they enter ours." Dr. Crenshaw's eyes, glazed and aimless like those we'd seen on Rachel, sat above a stretching opening in his face, what had once been his face. His mouth and nose had been consumed by that unstoppable, unseen mass. Then, when the wound eventually swallowed his eyeballs, Howard and I watched each of those tearful spheres turn into red and white mist. Mist swallowed, like everything else, by thin air. Only holes remained, cutting a tunnel from the front to the back of Crenshaw's head. The beam of my torch bored straight through to the other side for a drawn-out second. Then, the man's body crumpled into a lifeless, near-skinless mound. Much like Rachel, the two corpses would, in little time at all, become nothing more than mounds of bloody clothes. Then came skittering from the cave's bowels, a cacophony of overlapping skittering noises, which sounded to me like an untold number of feet, tiny, moving relatively to their mass at an unfathomable speed. Howard and I saw nothing of the sort, of course. They are too small to be seen. But the cave floor, 10 feet under our watching point on the staircase, started to darken, as if some mass of enormity were approaching. Battalions of things only visible once they had collected in immeasurable numbers. Scientific curiosity did not get the best of us. We did not wait to see the unknown things up close. Howard and I rushed up the spiral staircase, rushed at such speed that we nearly tripped over the sides, falling to our deaths. We ran until we were winded. Then we kept running, even as the skittering started to sound along the walls, pursuing us towards the stairwell's exit. But they didn't follow us out of the top, didn't follow us into the rainforest. We made it. We had collapsed, lungs deflated and bodies crying in pain. But we made it. That was why it took me a few minutes to notice what was out of place. I was still processing all that had happened. Howard wasn't breathing. I crawled over his body, barely able to speak, and sobbed when I found him in the mud. I don't know how he managed to run up the staircase. There was nothing left of him in the dirt but bones and a few remaining strips of skin on his skull. Tears soaking my skin, I unclipped Howard's rucksack from the back of his half-body, and the man haunted me one final time by twisting onto his back, twisting to face me. I didn't move him. He moved himself, moved of his own accord. The rest is little more than blurry blotches in my memory, a blur of physical and mental anguish. I'm amazed that I'm here to tell this tale at all, that in my state, I succeeded in scaling down the Inselberg's vertical side, that I made it to the airport, flew back to Paris, and collapsed in my bed. Precisely 90 hours and 100 missed calls later, the adrenaline seems to have evacuated my system. It was only tonight that I found myself gripped by a fresh horror. I woke in the middle of the night to the return of that unfixable itch. It was barely a tickle in the cave. Now, I'm burning alive, but I'm so cold. I keep scratching, and with every fresh scratch, clumps of skin come away, wounds form, and they grow on their own. I am being consumed from the inside out, eaten by things too small to see. I don't know how those things escaped, but they did. Don't know how I survived so long, whilst the others perished so quickly. How I made it down the mountain, onto a plane, and back to France. Except, I do know. I know because I hear the chattering voices in my head. The voices which serve that thing back in the cave. The thing which watched me from the dark. They did not kill me quickly because they wanted me to make it back to the world of mankind. Wanted me to transport them out of the cave. They needed a host. And now they are the explorers, discovering our world, our home. A place that, for whatever reason, they weren't able to reach until I entered their den and carried them free. We enter their home, and they enter ours. If I'd known, I would have remained in that isolated sky forest to die. But it's too late. You see, I noticed it on the plane, but I thought I'd lost my mind. Thought I'd simply been affected by the trauma of what I'd experienced at the bottom of the stairwell. But I wasn't imagining things. The passengers started scratching their flesh. By the end of the flight, every last person on that flight was clawing irritably at their skin. It's out in the world now. You're not safe. Nobody's safe because they're too small to see. Too small and too quick. Forgive us for what we did. I am sorry.